The thunder rolled across the plains as Porter Ingram spotted her, a young woman slumped against his barn wall, soaked to the bone, her swollen belly visible even through the pouring rain. It was 1878, 3 years since he'd buried his wife and infant son, and Porter hadn't expected to find anyone out here, 10 miles from the nearest town in Wyoming territory, especially not a pregnant woman with tears streaming down her face, mixing with the raindrops. Porter dismounted from his stallion and approached cautiously. "Madam, are you hurt?" she startled, pressing herself against the weathered wood. Her eyes, wide and fearful, searched his face for any sign of threat. She couldn't have been more than 20, with copper hair plastered to her pale face. "I'm not going to harm you," Porter said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "My name's Porter Ingram. This is my ranch." The young woman's lips trembled. "I'm sorry for trespassing, sir. I just needed somewhere to rest." Porter noticed her torn dress, the mud caking her boots, and the small bundle clutched under her arm. She was running from something or someone. "You're welcome to come inside. Storm's only getting worse." He gestured toward the house, a modest 2-story structure he'd built with his own hands. "There's food and dry clothes that might fit you." She hesitated, one hand protectively covering her belly. "Why would you help a stranger?" The question pierced him. 3 years ago, his Elizabeth would have done the same without a second thought. "Because no one should be alone in a storm," he replied simply, "especially not in your condition." She studied him for a moment longer before nodding weakly. "Thank you, I'm Tessa Sanders." Porter reached out a hand to help her up, noticing how she winced as she stood. "How long have you been out here, Miss Sanders?" "Since yesterday afternoon," she admitted. "I walked from town, 10 miles on foot, pregnant in this weather." Porter felt a mixture of admiration and concern as he guided her toward the house, sheltering her with his duster as best he could. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace created a stark contrast to the raging storm. Porter helped Tessa to a chair and busied himself stoking the fire higher. "I have some of my late wife's clothes upstairs," he said, trying to sound matter-of-fact about it. "They might fit you better than mine would." Tessa's eyes softened. "I'm sorry about your wife," Porter nodded, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. 3 years now. "Childbed fever took her and our son." Tessa's hand went to her belly again, a flash of fear crossing her features. Porter immediately regretted his words. "I'll fetch those clothes. There's stew keeping warm on the stove. Help yourself." He headed upstairs, giving her space to collect herself. When he returned with a simple dress and shawl, Tessa had ladled herself a small bowl of stew but hadn't touched it. Tears were streaming down her face again. "Miss Sanders." Porter set the clothes down and knelt beside her chair. "Are you in pain? Do you need a doctor?" She shook her head. "No, I have nowhere to go. My parents disowned me when they found out, the baby's father." She trailed off, her voice hardening. "He said he loved me, promised to marry me, then he disappeared when he learned I was with child." Porter's jaw tightened. "Too many men took what they wanted and left women to face the consequences alone." "Where were you headed?" "Denver," she said. "My aunt lives there, but I ran out of money in town and the stagecoach wouldn't take me without payment." She looked up at him, shame and defiance mingling in her eyes. "I'm not a fallen woman, Mr. Ingram, despite what it looks like." "Never thought you were," Porter replied honestly. He'd seen enough of life to know that circumstances rarely told the whole story. "You can stay here tonight, rest. Tomorrow we'll figure something out." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, I can work. I'm good with a needle and I can cook." Porter shook his head. "Just rest for now. The room at the top of the stairs is made up. It was my son's room." Before, after Tessa had eaten and changed, Porter showed her to the small bedroom. It was simple: a bed, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window, but clean and comfortable. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," he said, turning to leave. "Mr. Ingram?" Tessa's voice stopped him. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Porter considered the question. "Because someone should be," he finally answered. As he closed the door, he heard her quiet sobs resume, and something protective stirred within him that he'd thought long dead. That night, as rain lashed against the windows and thunder shook the house, Porter sat before the fire, thinking about the young woman upstairs. He thought about Elizabeth, about the child they'd lost, about the empty years since. When a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the house, he heard a frightened cry from upstairs. Without thinking, he took the stairs 2 at a time, knocking softly on the door. "Miss Sanders, are you all right?" The door opened to reveal Tessa in Elizabeth's nightgown, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry the storm, it's all right," Porter assured her. "These Wyoming storms can rattle the bones." Another thunderclap made her jump. Porter instinctively reached out to steady her, his hand brushing her arm. Would you mind sitting with me for a while?" she asked, her voice small. Porter nodded, following her into the room. He took the rocking chair while she settled back on the bed, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Ingram," she said. "How long have you been out here?" 8 years, he replied. "Elizabeth and I came out from Pennsylvania after the war. I served with the Union. Afterward, we wanted a fresh start." He gestured around. "Built this place from nothing. You must be very capable," Tessa observed. Porter shrugged. "Just stubborn, my wife used to say." As the storm continued outside, they talked. Porter learned that Tessa was 19, the daughter of a merchant in a small Nebraska town. She'd been betrothed to the local banker's son, but had fallen for a handsome drifter who'd worked briefly at her father's store. James was everything Thomas wasn't: exciting, passionate, full of dreams about the West, she explained. "When I told him about the baby, he said we'd get married right away. The next morning, he was gone." Her voice hardened. "Along with $50 from my father's till." "I'm sorry," Porter said. "Some men don't deserve the title. My father gave me a choice: marry Thomas anyway or leave." Tessa's hand cradled her belly. "Thomas didn't want another man's child, so I left." They talked until the storm began to subside and Tessa's eyelids grew heavy. Porter rose to leave, but her voice stopped him again. "Mr. Ingram, what will happen tomorrow?" Porter paused at the door. "I was thinking, if you're agreeable, I could take you to Denver. It's a 4-day ride, but I have a wagon that would be comfortable enough." Tessa's eyes widened. "You do that for me?" "I need supplies anyway," he said, though it wasn't entirely true. "We could leave in a couple of days once you've rested." She studied him, as if trying to discern his motives. "Why help me this way? You don't know me." Porter thought about all the nights he'd spent alone in this house, haunted by what might have been. "Because no child should come into this world unwanted," he finally said. "And no mother should face it alone if there's someone who can help." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "Thank you." That night, Porter made a silent promise to both Tessa and her unborn child they would not face this world alone, not as long as he had breath in his body. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something he hadn't felt in 3 long years: purpose. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed everything clean. Porter was already up, feeding the livestock, when Tessa appeared on the porch wearing Elizabeth's calico dress. The sight of her in his late wife's clothes didn't pain him as he'd expected. Instead, it felt right somehow, as if Elizabeth would have approved. "Good morning," she called, shielding her eyes from the sun. "May I help with anything?" Porter gestured for her to stay put. "Rest. Doctor once told my wife that expectant mothers should take it easy." "I've been taking it easy for months," Tessa replied with a small smile. "I'll go stir crazy if I don't do something." Porter relented, letting her gather eggs while he finished with the horses. He watched her move around the chicken coop, talking softly to the hens. She had a gentleness about her that reminded him of Elizabeth, but there was a strength there too, the kind that came from facing hardship. Over breakfast, Porter laid out his plan. "We'll leave for Denver day after tomorrow. Today, I need to repair the wagon wheel and get things in order here. Tomorrow, we'll ride into town for supplies." Tessa nodded, but her expression grew troubled. "There's something I should tell you," she said, setting down her fork. "In town, there might be talk. I stayed at the boarding house for a few days before my money ran out. Mrs. Holloway, the owner, wasn't kind about my situation. Porter had met Agatha Holloway, a sharp-tongued widow who appointed herself the town's moral guardian. "Don't worry about Mrs. Holloway," he said. "Her opinion matters less than dirt to me." Tessa's smile was grateful, but her worry remained. "It's not just her. I tried to find work, but no one would hire me." She hesitated. "They called me terrible things, Mr. Ingram. If you're seen with me, Porter," he interrupted. "If we're traveling together, you should call me Porter." He leaned forward. "And I don't care what anyone in town thinks. They've had plenty to say about the hermit widower these past years. One more rumor won't make a difference." That day passed in comfortable productivity. Porter worked on the wagon while Tessa insisted on cleaning the house and baking bread. By evening, they'd settled into an easy rhythm, as if they'd known each other longer than a day. After supper, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold, Porter found himself telling Tessa about Elizabeth's stories he hadn't shared with anyone. "She loved sunsets," he said. "Used to say God painted the sky different every evening just to keep us looking up." Tessa smiled. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Porter agreed. "She would have liked you." Tessa looked at him, surprised. "How can you know that?" "Elizabeth believed in second chances," Porter replied simply, "and in helping folks who needed it." "Is that what I am to you, a charity case?" There was no accusation in her tone, just honest inquiry. Porter considered his words carefully. "No, maybe at first I saw someone who needed help, but now—" He met her gaze. "Now I see Tessa Sanders, a brave woman making her way against the odds. There's no charity in admiring that." A blush colored her cheeks as she looked away. "I'm not brave, just desperate." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Porter replied. That night, after Tessa had gone to bed, Porter sat up late, wondering about the feelings stirring within him. It seemed disloyal to Elizabeth somehow, this warmth he felt toward Tessa. Yet a small voice inside reminded him that Elizabeth, who'd loved life so fiercely, wouldn't have wanted him to spend his years alone. The next day, they rode into town together. Porter felt Tessa's tension as they approached the small cluster of buildings that made up Cypress Creek. She sat straight-backed beside him on the wagon seat, her borrowed shawl pulled tight despite the warm day. "We'll make this quick," he assured her. "General store, then the doctor to see if he has any advice for our journey." Tessa nodded, her knuckles white where she gripped the seat. "Thank you." The stairs began the moment they pulled up to Whitaker's general store. Two women on the boardwalk stopped their conversation to openly gawk. Inside, Mrs. Whitaker's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline when Porter helped Tessa through the door. "Mr. Ingram," Mrs. Whitaker greeted, her eyes flicking between them. "Unusual to see you in town twice in 1 month. Need supplies for a trip," Porter replied evenly. "Denver, Mrs." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "Denver, is it? Long journey for a woman in her condition." Before Porter could respond, the door opened behind them and Agatha Holloway entered. Her sharp eyes landed on Tessa and her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Well, Miss Sanders, I see you found accommodations after all." Her gaze shifted to Porter. "Mr. Ingram, I wouldn't have expected this from you." Porter felt Tessa stiffen beside him. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "Expected what, Mrs. Holloway? Neighborly kindness." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "This girl is no better than she ought to be. Running around with that drifter, and now, that's enough," Porter cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. The store had gone silent, every ear straining to catch the confrontation. "Miss Sanders is under my protection. Anyone who has unkind words for her will answer to me." Mrs. Holloway's face flushed. "Protection? Is that what I'm taking Miss Sanders to her aunt in Denver," Porter continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And yes, she's staying at my ranch until we leave. Anyone who wants to make something unseemly of that can save their breath." Mrs. Whitaker, sensing a profitable scene unfolding in her store, quickly intervened. "What supplies will you be needing, Mr. Ingram?" As Porter listed their requirements, he kept his hand on Tessa's back, feeling her trembling subside. When they left the store 30 minutes later loaded with provisions, he could see she was fighting tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered as he helped her back onto the wagon. "I've brought scandal to your doorstep." Porter shook his head. "Don't give it another thought." He glanced around at the curious onlookers. This town needed something new to talk about anyway. They visited Dr. Farley next, who proved more kind than the townspeople. He examined Tessa briefly and provided advice for their journey along with a small bottle of tonic for nausea. "Take it slow," he advised Porter. "Stop often. Her time is about 6 weeks away by my estimation." As they drove back to the ranch, Tessa was quiet, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. "Porter, I've been thinking. Perhaps I shouldn't go to Denver." He looked at her, surprised. "Why not? You said your aunt would take you in." "She would," Tessa admitted. "But she's elderly, living in a small apartment above a millinery shop. It's no place for a baby." She twisted her hands in her lap. "And what you said in town about protection, it gave me an idea." Porter waited, sensing her nervousness. "What if I stayed? At your ranch, I mean, not forever," she added quickly. "Just until the baby comes, I could keep house for you, cook, mend, earn my keep. And then, after the baby arrives and I'm recovered, I could find work somewhere and move on." Porter considered her proposal. The idea of Tessa staying, filling his empty house with life again, was more appealing than he wanted to admit, but there were realities to consider. The town gossip would be merciless, he warned. They'd assume the worst. Tessa met his eyes. "I've already faced the worst of what people can say about me. I can weather more if it means a safe place for my child to be born." Porter nodded slowly. "All right, but on one condition." "What's that?" "You stay as long as you need, not just until the baby comes, until you have a real plan, somewhere safe to go." He held her gaze. "I won't send you and an infant out into the world with nowhere to land." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "Why would you do that for us?" Porter looked away, watching the prairie grass bend in the wind. "Because 3 years ago I lost everything that mattered. If I can prevent someone else from facing that kind of loneliness, I will." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, Porter found himself studying Tessa's profile. The copper of her hair caught the fading light, and her hand absently stroked her rounded belly. Something protective and tender unfurled in his chest, something he'd thought had died with Elizabeth. "Porter," Tessa's voice broke into his thoughts. "There's something else I've been thinking about." He waited, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "When the baby comes, it will need a name." She looked down at her hands. "A surname? If I use Sanders, everyone will know the child was born out of wedlock. That's a heavy burden for a little one." Porter understood immediately what she was suggesting and the gravity of it. "You're thinking of giving the child my name." Tessa nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "It would be a pretense, of course. We would know the truth. But the child would be spared some pain." She finally looked up. "It's too much to ask, I know." Porter thought of his own son, who had lived only hours, not long enough even to be given the name they'd chosen. He thought of the empty cradle upstairs, the dreams that had died with Elizabeth. "It's not too much," he said quietly. "But Tess, there's only one proper way for a child to bear my name." Her eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "I'm not proposing love," Porter clarified, wanting to be honest. "I respect you too much to pretend feelings I'm not sure of yet, but I am offering partnership, protection. A family for your child." He took a deep breath. "If you'll have me, I'll be a husband to you and a father to your baby. In time, perhaps the rest will follow." Tessa's hand trembled as she reached for his. "You would marry me, knowing I carry another man's child." "I would marry you," Porter confirmed, "knowing you are brave and kind and stronger than anyone gives you credit for. The child is innocent in all this, and already I find myself wanting to protect you both." Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks. "This is madness. We barely know each other." Porter smiled slightly. "My grandfather proposed to my grandmother the day they met. They were married 52 years. And were they happy?" Tessa asked. "They were devoted," Porter replied, "which might be better than mere happiness." Tessa looked out at the darkening prairie, considering. "If I say yes, what happens when the baby comes? What if you look at the child and see only the man who abandoned us?" It was a fair question, one Porter had asked himself. When I look at your child, I'll see only that a child, innocent, deserving of love." He squeezed her hand. "I lost my chance to be a father once. I never thought I'd get another." As night fell around them, Tessa gave her answer. "Yes," she whispered, "for the baby, for a chance at a family. Yes." 3 days later, they stood before the circuit preacher who had stopped in Cypress Creek on his monthly rounds. The ceremony was brief, witnessed only by Dr. Farley and his wife, who had been kind to Tessa in town. There was no celebration afterward, just a quiet ride home to the ranch that was now theirs together. That night, Porter showed Tessa to the master bedroom, then excused himself to sleep in the spare room. "There's no rush," he told her gently. "We have time to grow into this." In the weeks that followed, they established a rhythm. Porter worked the ranch while Tessa made the house truly habitable for the first time in years. They took their meals together, talked about their pasts, and slowly, carefully built trust. Word had spread about their hasty marriage, and the expected gossip followed. But it died down faster than either expected, replaced by news of a cattle rustling operation to the north. One afternoon, a month after their wedding, Porter returned from mending fences to find Tessa in the small room next to their bedroom, the one that had stood empty since he'd packed away his son's things. She was cleaning, the windows open to the spring air, a bouquet of wildflowers on the windowsill. "I hope you don't mind," she said when she saw him. "I thought it was time to make this a nursery again." Porter stood in the doorway, memories washing over him. He saw Elizabeth sitting in the rocking chair, dreaming of the child they would raise. For a moment, the grief threatened to overwhelm him. Then he looked at Tessa, his wife now, her belly grown larger, her eyes uncertain as she waited for his reaction. "I don't mind," he said softly. "It's time." That night, for the first time, Porter didn't retire to the spare room. Instead, he sat on the edge of their bed, watching as Tessa brushed out her long copper hair. "Elizabeth died because I couldn't get the doctor in time," he said suddenly. The fear that had haunted him for weeks finally voiced itself. The snow was too deep. By the time I made it to town, it was too late for both of them. Tessa set down her brush and moved to sit beside him. "That wasn't your fault. When your time comes," Porter continued, "I'm bringing Dr. Farley here 2 weeks early. He'll stay in the spare room until the baby arrives. I won't take any chances." Tessa took his hand. "You're a good man, Porter Ingram." He looked at their joined hands. "I'm trying to be the man you deserve." That night, they slept side by side for the first time, not as lovers yet, but as partners. Porter's hand resting protectively over the swell where his promised child grew. As spring turned to summer, something shifted between them. It happened gradually, a lingering touch here, a shared smile there. Porter found himself watching Tessa as she moved about their home, admiring her quiet strength, her gentle humor. And sometimes he caught her watching him too, a warmth in her eyes that made his heart race. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing he'd built for her, Tessa suddenly gasped and grabbed his hand, placing it on her belly. "Feel," she whispered, under his palm. Porter felt a strong kick, then another. His eyes widened. "That's quite a fighter you've got there." "Our fighter," Tessa corrected softly. "This baby will be ours, Porter, just as you promised that night in the storm." Porter met her gaze, seeing in it something he'd been afraid to hope for. "Tessa, I know we married for the child's sake," she interrupted. "But these past months I've grown to care for you in ways I never expected." Her cheeks flushed. I think I'm falling in love with you, Porter Ingram." Porter's heart swelled. Carefully, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, their first real kiss. When he pulled back, he saw tears in her eyes. "I already fell," he admitted. "Somewhere between finding you in that storm and watching you make this house a home again." That night they truly became husband and wife, their embraces gentle due to Tessa's condition, but no less passionate for it. 2 weeks before Tessa's time, as promised, Dr. Farley arrived to stay at the ranch. The doctor's presence eased Porter's anxiety, and Tessa found herself enjoying the older man's company and stories. The baby, however, had its own schedule. 3 days after the doctor's arrival, in the middle of a summer afternoon, Tessa's labor began. Porter paced outside their bedroom as Dr. Farley attended to her, each cry from within cutting him to the quick. "This is normal," the doctor assured him during one brief appearance. "She's young and strong." 8 hours later, as the sun set over the Wyoming plains, a new cry joined Tessa's, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "Mr. Ingram," Dr. Farley called, "come meet your daughter." Porter entered the room on shaky legs. Tessa lay propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up at him, her smile brighter than he'd ever seen it. "Porter, look at her. Isn't she perfect?" He approached the bed carefully, his heart hammering. The tiny face that peered up at him from the blankets was red and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair plastered to her head. As he watched, her eyes opened dark blue, unfocused but already seeking. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice catching, "just like her mother." Tessa shifted the baby slightly. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" Porter hesitated only a moment before reaching for the tiny bundle. As he cradled her against his chest, the baby's hand escaped the blanket, her impossibly small fingers wrapping around his callous thumb. In that moment, any lingering doubt that he could love this child as his own vanished completely. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I've been waiting for you." Tessa watched them, tears streaming down her face. "What should we name her?" Porter thought for a moment. "Elizabeth," he suggested softly, "if that's all right with you." Tessa nodded. "Elizabeth Sanders Ingram. It's perfect." That night, after Dr. Farley had checked both mother and baby one final time and retired to the spare room, Porter sat beside the bed where Tessa and Elizabeth slept. His family. The word still felt new, precious. 3 years ago, he'd thought his chance at happiness was buried alongside Elizabeth and their son. Now, watching his wife and daughter sleep peacefully, Porter understood that life could bring new beginnings when you least expected them. As if sensing his thoughts, Tessa stirred, her eyes opening sleepily. "You should rest," she murmured. Porter leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Tessa smiled, reaching for his hand. "I love you, Porter Ingram." "And I love you, Tessa Ingram," he replied, the words coming easily now. "Both of you more than I thought possible." Outside, a soft summer rain began to fall, much gentler than the storm that had brought Tessa to his door. Porter thought of all the twists of fate that had led to this moment, the grief that had nearly broken him, the desperate journey that had brought Tessa to his ranch, the promise made on a stormy night. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest blessings arrived in unexpected packages. A pregnant girl in tears, a widower's promise, and the family they had built together against all odds on the wild Wyoming frontier.